I lost my family today, take me with you, native woman pleaded with lonely Cowboy. The gunshot echoed across the canyon. Before Jake Carter even saw the smoke, he jerked his horse to a stop, hand already on his revolver. 3 more shots followed, rapid and desperate. The sound came from the valley below where he'd spotted wagon tracks that morning. His jaw tightened. Nothing good ever came from gunfire in Apache territory. Jake spurred his horse forward, keeping low in the saddle. He'd been riding alone for 2 weeks, heading nowhere in particular since leaving his ranch in Texas. The bank had taken everything after the drought killed his cattle. At 42, he figured he'd just keep moving until something stopped him or he stopped caring which came first. The shooting had ended by the time he reached the ridge overlooking the valley. Smoke rose from a burned wagon. Bodies lay scattered in the dirt. Jake's stomach turned. He'd seen plenty of death during his years as a cavalry scout, but it never got easier. He counted 4 men down, all wearing the dust-covered clothes of settlers. Raiders had hit them hard and fast. Movement caught his eye near the wagon's wreckage. A woman stumbled into view, her buckskin dress torn and bloodied. She fell to her knees beside one of the bodies, her long black hair covering her face as she bent forward. Her shoulders shook with silent grief. Jake guided his horse down the slope carefully, watching the surrounding hills for any sign the raiders might return. The woman's head snapped up at the sound of hooves on rock. Her dark eyes were wide with terror until she saw he was alone. She didn't run, just stared at him with a look that made his chest ache. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. The woman stood on shaking legs, backing toward the wagon. Jake stopped 10 feet away, giving her space. Up close, he could see she was young, maybe 25. Blood streaked her face and arms, but he couldn't tell if it was hers or belonged to the dead men around them. "They're gone," she said in clear English, her voice hollow. "All of them. My husband, my brother, my father, my uncle." She pointed at each body as she named them. "The raiders took our horses and supplies. They burned everything." Jake looked at the destruction. The wagon had been carrying farming equipment and household goods. These people had been heading west to start fresh, just like hundreds of others. They'd never make it now. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing the words meant nothing. The woman walked closer, studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You ride alone," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah. No family?" "Not anymore." She nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without more words needed. She glanced at the bodies again, then back at him. Her eyes had changed from terrified to something harder, more determined. "I lost my family today," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Take me with you." Jake stepped back, shaking his head. "Ma'am, I can't. I'm heading nowhere. I got no money, no home, nothing to offer." "I don't need money or a home." She moved closer, desperation creeping into her tone. "I need to leave this place. If you leave me here, I'll die. The raiders might come back, or wolves, or I'll starve. Please." He wanted to refuse. Taking on another person meant responsibility, and he'd failed everyone who ever depended on him. His wife had died giving birth to their stillborn son 5 years ago. His ranch hands had scattered when he couldn't pay them. He was better off alone, where he couldn't let anyone else down. But looking at this woman standing among her dead family, he knew he couldn't ride away. His mother had raised him better than that, even if he'd forgotten most of her lessons over the years. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mary. I'm Jake." He sighed, already regretting his next words. "Get whatever you can salvage. We need to move before dark." Mary's expression didn't change much, but he saw relief flicker in her eyes. She turned to the wagon and began pulling out items that hadn't burned. Jake walked to the bodies, removing his hat. He'd need to bury them or at least cover them with rocks. It was the right thing to do. As he worked, he wondered what he'd just agreed to. The woman was a stranger, and the frontier was no place for traveling with someone you didn't trust. But something in her eyes reminded him of himself, lost and looking for any reason to keep going. Maybe they could help each other survive a little longer. Or maybe they'd both end up dead in some forgotten canyon. Either way, Jake figured it beat dying alone. The sun had started its descent toward the horizon when Jake finished stacking rocks over the last body. Mary stood beside him with a small bundle of belongings, watching silently as he said a brief prayer over the graves. He wasn't much for religion anymore, but it seemed proper. "We should go," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Raiders sometimes circle back to check for survivors." Mary nodded and walked to his horse. Jake helped her up, then swung into the saddle behind her. The horse snorted at the extra weight, but didn't protest. They headed north, away from the burned wagon and the fresh graves, toward a future neither of them could predict. As they rode, Jake noticed Mary didn't look back even once. She sat straight in the saddle, her eyes fixed on the horizon ahead. Whatever grief she felt, she'd locked it away deep inside. He recognized that kind of survival instinct. It was the same one that had kept him breathing after losing everything he loved. The canyon walls rose around them as they followed a narrow trail through the rocks. Jake kept alert for any sign of danger, his right hand never far from his gun. Mary remained silent, her body tense against his as the horse picked its way through loose stones and sparse brush. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "North," Jake said. "There's a town called Silver Creek about 3 days' ride. We can figure things out there." And then? He didn't have an answer for that. His plan, if you could call it that, had been to just keep moving until something changed or he ran out of trail. Now he had another person depending on him, and the weight of that responsibility settled heavy on his shoulders. "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm making this up as I go." Mary was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's better than having no plan at all." Jake almost smiled at that. Maybe she was right. Maybe stumbling forward together was better than wandering alone. Or maybe they were both just fooling themselves, trying to find meaning where none existed. The sun touched the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Jake guided the horse toward a cluster of rocks that would provide shelter for the night. They'd need to make camp soon, and he wanted defensible ground in case trouble found them. As they dismounted, Mary finally spoke again. "Thank you for not leaving me." Jake tied the horse to a scrubby tree and started gathering wood for a fire. "Don't thank me yet. We got a long road ahead, and I can't promise it'll end anywhere good." "It doesn't matter where it ends," Mary said, kneeling to help with the firewood. "What matters is I'm not dying alone in that valley." Jake looked at her in the fading light, seeing the strength beneath her grief. Maybe taking her along wasn't such a bad idea after all. At least if trouble came, he'd have someone watching his back. And maybe, just maybe, having someone to protect would give him a reason to be more careful with his own life. He struck a match and lit the kindling, watching as flames caught and grew. The night settled around them, full of unknown dangers and uncertain possibilities. But for the first time in months, Jake Carter didn't feel quite so alone. They ate a cold meal of dried meat and hardtack from Jake's saddlebags. Mary accepted her share without complaint, chewing slowly while staring into the fire. Flames cast dancing shadows across her face, highlighting the exhaustion in her features. She'd been through hell today, yet she sat upright and alert, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond their small circle of light. "You should sleep," Jake said. "I'll take first watch." Mary shook her head. "I won't sleep tonight. Maybe not for many nights." He understood that too. After his wife died, he'd spent weeks afraid to close his eyes, knowing the nightmares that waited. "Suit yourself, but if you change your mind, I'll wake you if anything happens." "Tell me about Silver Creek," she said instead. "What kind of town is it?" Jake poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "Small mining town last time I passed through. Had maybe 200 people, a handful of businesses. The silver played out years ago, but folks stayed on. Some farming, some cattle, enough to keep the place alive." "Will they welcome a half-breed woman?" Mary asked bluntly. The question hung in the air between them. Jake had noticed her mixed heritage, the blend of native and European features, but hadn't thought much about it. Out here, survival mattered more than bloodlines, but he knew that wasn't true everywhere. "Some will, some won't," he said honestly. "Same as any place. But Silver Creek's seen enough hard times that most folks there don't have energy for hate. They're too busy trying to get by." Mary nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. "My mother was Navajo. My father was a trader from St. Louis. He married her proper in a church, which some people never forgave him for. My husband was white from a good family in Missouri. His parents disowned him when we married." "People can be cruel," Jake said. "Yes, they can." Mary's voice hardened. "But they can also be kind. My husband chose me over his family's money and respect. My father chose my mother over an easy life. I've seen both sides of people, the good and the terrible." Jake added more wood to the fire, considering her words. "What made you speak English so well, if you don't mind me asking?" "My father insisted we learn everything. Reading, writing, arithmetic, history. He said education was the only thing nobody could take from us." He was right about that, at least. "They took our wagon, our supplies, our family, our future, but they couldn't take what I know, what I learned. Smart man, your father. He was." Mary's voice cracked slightly on those two words. the first sign of the grief she was holding back. They all were. My husband had plans for a farm in California. My brother wanted to raise horses. My uncle was going to open a store. They had dreams. Jake didn't know what to say to that. Dreams died as easily as men did out here, maybe easier. He'd had dreams once, too, before the drought and the debt and the death. Now he just had days, one after another, stretching ahead with no particular purpose. "I'm sorry," he finally said again, knowing it wasn't enough. Mary stood abruptly walking to the edge of their firelight. She stood there for a long moment, her back to Jake, her shoulders rigid. When she returned, her expression was composed again, the moment of vulnerability locked away. "Tomorrow we ride for Silver Creek," she said. "And then we decide what comes next." Agreed. They settled into an uneasy silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The fire crackled and popped, a small comfort against the vast darkness surrounding them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and Jake's horse stamped nervously at the sound. Despite her earlier words, Mary eventually dozed off, sitting up, her head drooping forward. Jake didn't wake her. He kept watch through the long hours, his rifle across his lap, listening to every sound in the night. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant, offering no answers to the questions running through his mind. What was he doing? Taking responsibility for this woman when he could barely take care of himself seemed like a recipe for disaster, but leaving her would have been worse. Some lines a man couldn't cross and still call himself human. As dawn painted the eastern sky pale gray, Mary stirred and opened her eyes. She looked disoriented for a moment, then memory crashed back and her face went blank again. "We should move," she said. Jake nodded, already kicking dirt over the fire's remains. They had a long road ahead, and standing still wouldn't make it any shorter. They rode through the morning in silence, the sun climbing higher and burning off the cool night air. The land around them was harsh and beautiful, all red rock and sparse vegetation, with mountains rising in the distance like jagged teeth against the sky. Jake kept them to game trails and dry creek beds, places where their tracks wouldn't show easily. Around midday, Mary finally spoke. "Do you think they'll come after us? The raiders?" Jake considered it. "Probably not. They got what they wanted from your wagon. We're not worth the trouble of tracking. Unless they realize a woman survived." That thought had occurred to Jake too, though he hadn't wanted to voice it. Some men viewed women as prizes to be claimed, especially out here where law and civilization were just distant concepts. "We'll be careful. Stay alert. If I tell you to run, you run and don't look back." "I won't run," Mary said firmly. "I've done enough running." Jake twisted in the saddle to look at her. "If it comes to a fight, running is a smart choice. Smart doesn't always mean right." Her dark eyes met his, challenging. "I may not have a gun, but I can fight. My father taught me to use a knife, and I'm stronger than I look." He believed her. There was steel in this woman, forged in ways he could only guess at. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. They continued north, following a ridge that gave them a clear view of the surrounding terrain. Jake's eyes constantly scanned for movement, for the telltale dust cloud of riders, for anything that seemed out of place. But the land remained empty except for the occasional hawk circling overhead. By late afternoon, they'd covered good ground. Jake estimated they were about halfway to Silver Creek, maybe a day and a half out if they kept this pace. His horse was holding up well despite the double load, but they'd need to rest more frequently tomorrow. As the sun began its descent, Jake spotted smoke on the horizon. His hand went to his gun instinctively, but then he noticed the smoke was rising in a steady column, not the scattered pattern of a wildfire or a raid. "Homestead," he said. "Probably a rancher or farmer who settled out here." "Should we avoid it?" Mary asked. Jake thought about it. They needed water, and his canteen was running low. A homestead meant a well or a creek nearby, but it also meant people, and people meant questions and possible trouble. "We'll approach careful," he decided. "See if they're friendly. We need water, and you could use some proper food and rest." They guided the horse down from the ridge, moving slowly toward the source of the smoke. As they drew closer, a small ranch came into view. One main house, a barn, and a corral holding maybe a dozen horses. Someone here was doing all right for themselves. A man stepped out of the house as they approached, a shotgun cradled in his arms. He was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades under the sun. Two younger men emerged from the barn, both armed as well. Jake raised his hand in greeting, stopping his horse a respectful distance away. "Afternoon. We're heading north to Silver Creek. wondering if we might water our horse and refill our canteen." The older man studied them for a long moment, his eyes moving from Jake to Mary and back again. "You two look like you've had a rough time of it." "Could say that," Jake replied, keeping his voice neutral. "Where are you coming from?" "South. Had some trouble with raiders yesterday." The older man's expression darkened. "They hit you?" "Hit her family's wagon. I came along after. She's the only survivor." The man's grip on his shotgun relaxed slightly. He glanced at Mary, something like sympathy crossing his features. "That's a hard thing. These raiders been causing trouble all up and down this territory for months now. The law doesn't care enough to do anything about it." "Never does," Jake said. The man nodded slowly, then lowered his shotgun completely. "Name's Henry Walsh. This is my spread. Those are my sons, Carl and Danny." He gestured to the two younger men who also lowered their weapons. "You're welcome to water your horse and stay for supper if you're hungry. We don't get much company out here, and I'd like to hear more about these raiders." Jake glanced at Mary, who gave a small nod. "We'd appreciate that, Mr. Walsh. I'm Jake Carter, and this is Mary." They dismounted, and one of the sons led their horse to the water trough. Henry Walsh invited them into the house, where a woman was cooking over a wood stove. She turned as they entered, her kind face breaking into a smile that faded when she saw the condition Mary was in. "Oh, you poor dear," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm Margaret Walsh. Let me get you cleaned up and find you some fresh clothes." Mary hesitated, but Margaret took her arm gently and led her toward the back of the house. Jake watched them go, feeling oddly protective, even though Mary was safer here than she'd been since yesterday. Henry poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Jake. "Sit. Tell me what happened." Jake settled into a chair and told the story, leaving out nothing important. Henry listened without interrupting, his face growing grimmer as the tale unfolded. When Jake finished, the older man drained his whiskey and poured another. "4th wagon train hit in 2 months, Henry said. "Law's useless. Town council in Silver Creek talks about forming a militia, but nobody wants to leave their land unprotected long enough to hunt these bastards down." "How many raiders are we talking about?" "Reports vary. Some say 6, some say a dozen. They hit fast and hard, take what they want, and disappear into the canyons. Smart enough to avoid targets that can fight back." Jake absorbed this information, his mind working through the implications. If the raiders were still operating in the area, he and Mary weren't safe yet. 3 days to Silver Creek suddenly seemed like a very long time. Margaret returned with Mary, who now wore a simple cotton dress and had her hair tied back. She looked younger, more vulnerable without the dirt and blood, but her eyes remained hard and watchful. "Supper's ready," Margaret announced. They ate at a long wooden table, the food simple but plentiful. Stew with vegetables and beef, fresh bread, and coffee that tasted like heaven after days of nothing but water. Jake noticed Mary ate mechanically, as if the food had no taste, but she cleaned her plate nonetheless. After the meal, Henry lit his pipe and leaned back in his chair. "You're welcome to stay the night. We've got a spare room, and it'd be safer than camping in the open." Jake considered refusing, but the offer was too good to pass up. A real bed, a roof, and walls between them and whatever lurked in the darkness outside. "We'd be grateful, Mr. Walsh." "Henry, no need for formality under my roof." He puffed on his pipe, studying Jake with shrewd eyes. "You a cowboy, Mr. Carter?" "Was. Had a ranch in Texas until the drought killed it. Been drifting since. We could use another hand here if you're looking for work. Pay's not great, but it's steady, and you'd have a roof and meals." The offer caught Jake off guard. He'd been so focused on just surviving day to day that he hadn't thought about settling anywhere. "I appreciate that, Henry, but I don't know if I'm ready to put down roots again." "Think on it," Henry said. "Offer stands as long as you need it to." Later, lying in a real bed for the first time in weeks, Jake stared at the ceiling and thought about Henry's offer. A steady job, a place to belong, a chance to rebuild what he'd lost. It was tempting, maybe too tempting. Every time he'd tried to build something, life had knocked it down. Why should this time be any different? In the next room, he could hear Mary moving around, restless despite the comfortable bed. He wondered what she was thinking, whether she regretted asking him to take her along. Tomorrow they'd continue to Silver Creek, and then she'd be free to make her own choices, find her own path. She didn't need him anymore. But as sleep finally claimed him, Jake realized he might need her more than she needed him. Having someone to protect, someone to care about, gave him a purpose he'd been missing. Maybe that was selfish, using her tragedy to fill the emptiness in his own life. Or maybe they were both just two broken people trying to find a way forward together. Either way, tomorrow would bring new challenges. For tonight, at least. They were safe and warm and fed. That was more than either of them had yesterday, and maybe more than they'd have tomorrow. Jake had learned to appreciate small mercies when they came. He closed his eyes and let the darkness take him, his last thought a silent prayer that they'd both live long enough to figure out what came next. Dawn came too early, pale light streaming through the window to pull Jake from a dreamless sleep. He dressed quickly and quietly, stepping out of the room to find Henry already up and making coffee in the kitchen. The older man nodded a greeting and poured a second cup without being asked. "Sleep well?" Henry asked. "Better than I have in a long time," Jake admitted. They stood in comfortable silence, sipping coffee and watching the sun paint the eastern sky orange and gold. Outside, the ranch was coming to life. Henry's sons were already at work in the barn, and chickens scratched in the yard, clucking contentedly. "You seem like a good man, Jake Carter," Henry said eventually. "And that woman you're traveling with, she's got strength in her. You two could do well here if you stayed." "I know," Jake set down his cup, "and I'm grateful for the offer. But I made a promise to get her to Silver Creek, and I need to see that through first." "Fair enough. But remember what I said. Door's always open." Margaret appeared with Mary following behind her. Mary had her buckskin dress back on, cleaned and mended during the night. She carried the bundle of her belongings and looked ready to travel, though Jake could see the exhaustion still lurking in her eyes. They ate breakfast quickly, said their goodbyes, and were on the trail again by the time the sun fully cleared the horizon. Henry had sent them off with extra food and a full water skin, plus advice on the safest route to Silver Creek. "Good people," Mary said after they'd ridden for an hour. "Yeah," Jake agreed. "World could use more like them." "He offered you a job. It wasn't a question." Jake wondered how much Mary had overheard through the thin walls. "Did, but you said no, said I'd think about it. Wanted to get you to Silver Creek first." Mary was quiet for a while, her body swaying with the horse's rhythm. "You don't owe me anything, Jake. You saved my life, gave me a chance when you could have ridden away. That's more than most would do. If you want to go back to Henry's ranch, I'll understand." Jake felt something tighten in his chest. "What would you do in Silver Creek? Find work?" "Survive. Same as anyone. As a half-breed woman alone in a frontier town? I've survived worse. She probably had, but that didn't mean Jake wanted to leave her to face it alone. "Let's just get there first, and we'll both figure out what comes next." They rode in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. The land grew rougher as they climbed into the foothills, the trail winding through stands of pine and aspen. Jake kept alert for any sign of trouble, but the day passed without incident. By evening, they'd made good progress. Jake estimated they'd reach Silver Creek by tomorrow afternoon if they started early. They made camp in a sheltered spot near a stream, the sound of running water a soothing backdrop to the night. As Jake built a fire, Mary wandered to the stream to refill their water skins. She was gone longer than expected, and Jake was about to go check on her when she returned, her face pale in the fading light. "Riders camped upstream," she said quietly. "Maybe half a mile. I saw their fire." Jake's hand went to his gun. "How many?" "Couldn't tell. At least 4 or 5, from the size of the fire." "Could be travelers heading to Silver Creek same as us?" "Could be," Mary agreed, but her tone said she didn't believe it. Neither did Jake. Honest travelers would have hailed them when they passed this spot, not camped upstream without making their presence known. "We should move." "In the dark? Better than waiting here for them to find us." They quickly gathered their meager camp, leaving no sign they'd been there. Jake led the horse away from the stream, moving as quietly as possible through the trees. The moon was up, providing just enough light to navigate without breaking their necks, but also enough light for anyone hunting them to see by. They'd gone maybe 2 miles when Jake heard it, the sound of hoofbeats behind them moving fast. He cursed under his breath and spurred his horse to greater speed, weaving between trees and over rough ground. Mary clung to him, trusting his judgment even as branches whipped past their faces. The pursuit grew louder. Jake risked a glance back and saw torches bobbing through the darkness, at least 3 riders, maybe more. His horse was already laboring under the double load in the rough terrain. They couldn't outrun their pursuers for long. "There," Mary pointed to a cluster of large boulders ahead. "We can defend that position." Jake didn't have a better idea. He guided the horse toward the rocks and dismounted quickly, pulling Mary down after him. He slapped the horse's rump, sending it running. Maybe it would draw some of the riders away, and maybe it would survive this night to find another owner. They scrambled into the rocks just as the first rider appeared. Jake pulled his rifle and fired, the shot echoing through the night. The rider yelped and veered away. and the torches scattered as the pursuers sought cover. "How many bullets?" Mary whispered. 12 in the rifle, 6 in the revolver. Not enough if there were more than a handful of them. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of their breathing and the distant murmur of the stream. Jake scanned the darkness, trying to spot movement, but the riders had doused their torches and were being smart about it now. A voice called out from the darkness. "Hey there, friend." "No need for shooting. We just want to talk." Jake didn't answer. Talking was what got people killed out here. "We saw you had a woman with you. Now, we don't mean her no harm. We just want to trade for her. We got gold, supplies, whatever you want." Mary's hand found Jake's arm, her grip tight. "Don't," she whispered. "Wasn't planning on it," Jake murmured back. He fired 2 more shots in the direction of the voice, rewarded by cursing and the sound of someone scrambling away. But he'd given away their position, and now he could hear the raiders moving to surround them. "Last chance, friend," the voice called again. "Give us the woman, and you can ride away with your life and your pockets full of gold. Refuse, and we'll take her anyway after we kill you." Jake checked his remaining ammunition. 10 shots in the rifle, 6 in the revolver, against at least 5 men, probably more. The math wasn't in their favor. "I've got a knife," Mary said softly. "And I meant what I said before. I can fight." Jake looked at her in the moonlight, seeing the determination in her face. She'd already lost everything once. She wasn't going to go quietly into captivity or worse. "All right," he said. "But you stay behind me, and if I go down, you run for Silver Creek. Don't stop, don't look back, promise me." "I promise," Mary said, though Jake suspected it was a lie. He took a deep breath and shouted into the darkness. "You want her? Come and take her. But I promise you'll pay in blood for every step you take." Laughter answered him, harsh and cruel. "Have it your way, cowboy. Boys, let's show 'em what happens to fools who don't know when they're beaten." The attack came from 3 sides at once. Jake fired the rifle methodically, each shot carefully aimed. 2 men went down, and a third screamed as a bullet caught him in the leg. But there were more, shadows moving between the trees, closing in despite the casualties. Mary suddenly moved past him, her knife flashing in the moonlight. A raider had gotten close without Jake noticing, and Mary met him with the blade, driving it into his side with savage precision. The man fell with a gurgling cry, and Mary ripped the knife free, already turning to face the next threat. Jake's rifle clicked empty. He dropped it and pulled his revolver, firing twice at a shape rushing from the left. The man went down hard, not moving. 4 shots left, and he could see at least 3 more raiders circling, more cautious now after seeing their companions fall. A shot rang out from the darkness, and rock shards exploded near Jake's head. He ducked instinctively, feeling a sharp pain as a fragment cut his cheek. Another shot followed, and this time Mary cried out. Jake's heart stopped as he turned to see her stagger, blood spreading across her shoulder. Rage replaced fear. Jake stepped out from cover and emptied his revolver into the darkness, firing at muzzle flashes and movement and shadows. When the hammer clicked on an empty chamber, he threw the gun aside and grabbed Mary's fallen knife. If they wanted to finish this, they'd have to do it up close. But no more shots came. The surviving raiders had apparently decided Jake and Mary weren't worth losing any more men. Jake heard hoofbeats retreating, fading into the distance until only silence remained. He dropped to his knees beside Mary, his hands shaking as he examined her wound. The bullet had gone through the meat of her shoulder, missing bone and major blood vessels by what looked like luck alone. She'd live, but she needed proper medical care. "How bad?" Mary asked through gritted teeth. "Bad enough. We need to stop the bleeding and get you to a doctor." "Silver Creek?" "Silver Creek," Jake confirmed. He tore strips from his shirt and bound her wound as best he could in the darkness. Mary didn't cry out, though he knew it had to hurt like hell. When he finished, she sagged against him, her strength finally giving out. "You fought well," Jake said softly. "So did you." Mary's voice was weak but steady. "Thank you for not trading me. Never crossed my mind." They sat there among the rocks and the bodies until dawn broke, waiting to make sure the raiders were truly gone. When light finally came, Jake counted 5 dead men scattered around their position. 5 lives ended in the span of a few violent minutes. He felt nothing looking at them, no regret or satisfaction, just exhaustion. His horse had returned during the night, spooked but unharmed. Jake helped Mary into the saddle, then climbed up behind her, supporting her weight against his chest. They left the dead where they lay and resumed their journey north, every mile bringing them closer to Silver Creek and whatever future waited there. Mary slipped in and out of consciousness as they rode, her body burning with fever. Jake pushed the horse as hard as he dared, knowing infection could kill her as surely as a bullet. The wound needed cleaning and stitching by someone who knew what they were doing, and soon. By mid-afternoon, Silver Creek came into view. The town was bigger than Jake remembered, maybe 300 people now instead of 200. New buildings lined the main street, and he could see a sign for a doctor's office near the center of town. People stopped to stare as they rode in, a trail-worn man carrying a wounded woman on a tired horse. Jake ignored them all, making straight for the doctor's office. He dismounted carefully, lifting Mary down as gently as possible. The doctor, a middle-aged man with wire-rimmed spectacles, took one look at Mary's blood-soaked shoulder and ushered them inside. Put her on the table? What happened? Gunshot. Last night. She's been fevered for hours. The doctor began cutting away Mary's dress to expose the wound. You did decent field dressing, but this needs proper care. You her husband? Friend? Well, friend, you can wait outside. This is going to take a while. Jake hesitated, not wanting to leave Mary alone, but the doctor's firm look brooked no argument. He stepped out into the late afternoon sun, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. His legs shook, and dried blood from the cut on his cheek had crusted on his face. He must have looked like something dragged out of hell. A tall man in a sheriff's badge approached, his expression wary. You want to tell me what happened, stranger? Jake told the story again, this time including more details about the raiders. The sheriff, a man named Coleman, listened with growing concern. Same bunch that's been terrorizing the territory, Coleman said when Jake finished. You killed 5 of them, you say? Maybe more. I only counted what I could see come morning. That's good work, though I'm sorry about your friend. Dr. Warren is the best around. If anyone can save her, he can. She saved herself, Jake said. Killed one of them herself with just a knife. Coleman raised his eyebrows. Tough woman. You don't know the half of it. The sheriff offered Jake a room at the local boarding house and a meal at the saloon, both on the town's tab as thanks for thinning out the raider gang. Jake accepted gratefully, though he insisted on staying close to the doctor's office until he knew Mary's fate. Hours passed. The sun set, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. Jake sat on a bench outside the doctor's office, watching the town settle into evening. People walked past, some nodding gratefully, others eyeing him with suspicion. He was a stranger here, and strangers always drew attention in small towns. Finally, as full darkness fell, Dr. Warren emerged. Jake stood quickly, searching the man's face for clues. She'll live, Warren said, and Jake felt something loosen in his chest. The wound was clean, and I got it stitched and bandaged properly. She's strong, fought the fever off better than I expected. She's sleeping now, but you can see her briefly if you want. Jake followed the doctor inside. Mary lay on a cot in the back room, her shoulder wrapped in clean white bandages. Her face was pale but peaceful, her breathing steady and deep. Jake stood beside the cot, unsure what to say or do. She can stay here tonight, Warren said. After that, she'll need somewhere to recover for at least a week, maybe 2. The wound has to heal, and she needs rest and proper food. I'll figure something out, Jake said. He stayed with Mary for a few more minutes, then left her to sleep and made his way to the boarding house. The room was small but clean, with a real bed and a wash basin. Jake cleaned the blood off his face and hands, watching the water turn red and pink. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror above the basin, hardly recognizing the man staring back. 3 days ago, he'd been alone and directionless, just drifting through life without purpose. Now he had a wounded woman depending on him, a town grateful for his intervention, and decisions to make about the future. Life had a funny way of changing course when you least expected it. He fell into bed fully clothed and slept dreamlessly until morning. The next week passed in a blur of routine. Jake visited Mary twice a day at the doctor's office, watching as she slowly regained her strength. They talked sometimes about nothing important, just filling the silence. Other times they sat quietly, comfortable enough with each other not to need words. Sheriff Coleman asked Jake to write out a full account of the raider attack, which would be sent to the territorial governor. There was talk of forming a proper militia now that someone had proven the raiders could be beaten. Jake deflected questions about joining such an effort. He wasn't a hero, just a man who'd done what needed doing. On the 8th day, Dr. Warren declared Mary well enough to leave his care, though she'd need to take things easy for another week at least. Jake had arranged a room for her at the boarding house, using the last of his money and some credit extended by the grateful sheriff. They sat on the porch of the boarding house that evening, watching the sun set over Silver Creek. Mary's arm was in a sling, but her color had returned and her eyes were clear and alert again. So what now? She asked. Jake had been thinking about that question for days. I sent a telegram to Henry Walsh. Told him I'd take that job if it was still available. He wired back this morning. Said both of us are welcome. Mary turned to look at him. Both of us? Figured you could use honest work same as me. Henry's got a big spread. Always needs extra hands during the busy season. And Margaret mentioned they could use help in the house. It's not much, but it's a start. You didn't have to do that, I know. Jake watched the sun touch the distant mountains. But we make a decent team, you and me. Seems a shame to split up now. Mary was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. My family had dreams. Big dreams about California and farms and stores and horses. Those dreams died in that valley with them. I thought all my dreams died there too. And now? Now I think maybe I can have new dreams. Smaller ones maybe, but real. A job, a place to belong, people who don't judge me for my blood. That's more than I had a week ago. Jake nodded. He understood that feeling. He thought all his dreams were buried in Texas along with his wife and stillborn son. But sitting here with this tough, resilient woman who'd survived horrors that would have broken lesser people, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. We'll leave day after tomorrow, he said. Give you another day to rest and we can buy supplies for the journey. Sounds good. They sat together as darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, two broken people who'd found something worth holding on to in each other's survival. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Life on a ranch never was, and they'd both carry their scars, visible and invisible, for the rest of their days, but they'd face it together. Two survivors who'd learned that sometimes the best family was the one you built from the ashes of everything you'd lost. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The morning they left Silver Creek dawned. Clear and cold, frost sparkling on the rooftops like scattered diamonds. Jake loaded their supplies onto the horse they'd purchased with money the town had collected as a reward for dealing with the raiders. It wasn't much, but it was more than either of them had before. Mary emerged from the boarding house wearing new clothes, simple and practical, her arms still in the sling but moving more freely now. She'd bought herself a hat to protect against the sun, and Jake thought she looked more at peace than he'd yet seen her. Sheriff Coleman saw them off with a firm handshake and an invitation to return any time. Town could use people like you too, he said. Standing invitation to settle here if the ranch doesn't work out. Appreciate that, Jake replied. They rode south, retracing part of the journey that had brought them together. The landscape looked different now, less threatening somehow. Maybe it was the bright morning sun, or maybe it was just that they were riding towards something instead of away from it. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a quick meal. Mary had been quiet most of the morning, and Jake didn't push her to talk. She'd speak when she was ready. Can I ask you something? She finally said. Sure. That night with the raiders. You could have run when I got shot. Left me and saved yourself. Why didn't you? Jake considered the question carefully. Because leaving you would have made everything I lost mean nothing? My wife, my ranch, all of it. I failed them, but I didn't have to fail you too. You didn't fail them, Mary said gently. You can't control drought or death in childbirth. Those things just happen. I know that in my head. Heart's slower to catch up. I understand. Mary looked away across the plains. I keep thinking about my husband, wondering if there was something I could have done differently that day. If I'd noticed the raiders sooner, or if we'd taken a different trail, or if I'd convinced them to wait another day before traveling. You'd drive yourself crazy with those thoughts. I know, but they come anyway, especially at night. Jake moved closer, sitting beside her on the rock where she'd perched. And I guess we'll just have to be crazy together, share the load. Mary smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, making her look young and almost carefree. I suppose we will. They reached Henry Walsh's ranch as the sun was setting, the house and barn silhouetted against the orange sky. Henry himself came out to greet them, Margaret right behind him. The older couple's warm welcome felt like coming home, and for the first time since leaving Texas, Jake felt like he might actually belong somewhere again. Margaret fussed over Mary's healing wound while Henry showed Jake where they'd be staying, a small cabin behind the main house that the previous ranch hands had used. It was simple but sturdy, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. More importantly, it was theirs. That night, sitting around Henry's table with food and laughter and conversation flowing freely, Jake caught Mary's eye across the room. She nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement and thanks. They'd both lost everything, been broken down to nothing, and somehow found their way to this moment. Tomorrow would bring work and challenges and probably more pain along the way, but tonight they were safe and fed and among friends. Tonight they had a future to look forward to instead of a past to run from. Jake raised his glass in a silent toast to the woman who'd stumbled into his life in a moment of shared tragedy. She'd asked him to take her with him, not knowing where he was going or what he could offer. He'd said yes, not knowing it would lead them here, to this place, to this new beginning. Sometimes the best decisions were the ones you made without thinking, when instinct overrode caution and you just did what felt right. Taking Mary with him had felt right, even when logic said it was a mistake. And now, looking around this warm room filled with people who cared, Jake knew his instinct had been correct. They'd both lost their families, but maybe they'd found something just as important, a second chance. Not to replace what was gone, but to build something new from what remained. It wouldn't erase the pain or bring back the dead, but it was honest work toward an uncertain future, and that was more than enough. As the evening wound down and people began drifting toward bed, Mary touched Jake's arm gently. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." "Thank you for asking me to take you along," Jake replied. "Think you might have saved my life much as I saved yours. Then we're even. Guess we are." They walked together to the cabin, settling into their respective rooms with an understanding born of shared hardship and survival. Jake lay in bed listening to the night sounds, the rustle of wind through trees, the distant call of an owl, the soft movements of Mary in the next room. He thought about the title of the story they'd lived through, a lonely cowboy and a woman who'd lost everything, brought together by violence and tragedy, finding their way to something resembling peace. It wasn't the ending either of them would have written for themselves, but it was real and honest and true. And sometimes, Jake thought as sleep finally claimed him, that was the best kind of story there was. Not the one you planned, but the one you lived, with all its pain and loss and unexpected grace. Tomorrow they'd wake up and start building their new lives, one day at a time, one challenge at a time, together. But that was tomorrow. Tonight they could rest, knowing they'd survived the worst and come out the other side still standing. It was enough. It had to be enough. And somehow, miraculously, it was.